We are in the laws of Shchenim, neighbors. And we're learning now specifically a unique law called Bar Metzra. It is the law of a neighbor who has a field next to your field, and you want to sell your field. So the neighbor has the right of first refusal. If you sold it to somebody else, can even expropriate it, take it away from that person, paying, of course, paying them for what they paid for, right? You can't, you're not getting it for free. If you gift it, though, you don't have the right. If you are giving it, selling it to a widow or to an orphan and so on, also you don't have that right. There are many variations. It's based on the idea of asisas atayves ayashar. You should do what's good and what's straight and what is appropriate, the Torah tells us. So from here, we learn out that what's good and appropriate is that we allow a person who has a field, right, that is next to their field, that they can have two fields together to make it easier for them for plowing, for, doing the work on the field. Again, there's a many, what's the word? Exceptions to this, right? Hi, thank you. Okay, we're in chapter 13, in the laws of neighbors. When a person gives landed property as a gift, the rights of the neighbor do not apply. Right? A gift, it doesn't apply. Because selling, what does selling apply? Because selling is, thank you, I want to get money for my field. Well, you want to get money for your field. It's not about who you're giving it to. It's about what you're getting for it, right? So therefore, give it to your neighbor. Of course, if he wants it, if he wants to purchase it, give him the first right of refusal. That's appropriate. But if I'm gifting it to a friend of mine, so there's no right there for the other person. I'm giving it as a gift. So I don't want my neighbor. I'm not giving it to my neighbor as a gift. I'm giving it to my best friend as a gift for whatever reason, right? So then the law wouldn't apply. Clear? We just said the right of first refusal.
When the neighbor, when I give it to a friend and he gives it me back, can I then? Which laws apply then?
It's gifting. Gifting, it doesn't apply.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, when it's a back and forth deal, only to come around the law.
But I don't have to give it to anybody to go around the law. Keep it for myself. If I'm gifting it to someone, he's gifting it back to me. What do I have to go through all of that for?
Okay.
Just keep it.
Does the neighbor have to be a Jew?
Yes, the law is only, yes. And a non-Jew who owns it, they're not bound by this law. As a non-Jew who sells his property, right, and he sells it not to the neighbor, but to someone else, that law doesn't apply to him. It only applies to a Jew who's selling, okay? When the deed recording a gift states the giver accepts financial responsibility for this gift, the rights of the neighbor do apply. Since the deed mentions financial responsibility, it is obvious that the transfer was a sale. It was used, the term gift, only to nullify the rights of the neighbor. How much should the neighbor pay? The value of the property, right? So that you're talking about how to get around the law. Well, here's how someone is trying to get around that. The contract says I'm giving it as a gift, but there's some responsibility that comes with it, financial, right? Number 2, l'chaim. In the above situation, if the purchaser admits the ruse by saying, yes, we tried to perpetrate deception. It was a sale, and this is the price I paid for it. He must support his claim by taking an oath while holding a sacred article. Right. He may then collect his claim, as is the law concerning agents. So then he can get it, right? But he has to make an oath. We're not taking his word just based on his word. Only because he admitted. Okay. It appears to me that the purchaser must claim only a price that is appropriate for the property or slightly more. If, however, he claims that he paid 200 zuz when the property is worth 100, his word is not accepted. Okay, that makes sense, right? Halacha number 3. If the deed recording the gift states, I accept financial responsibility for this gift, it is expropriated from the recipient, he will give 200 zuz. I will give 200 zuz. The neighbor must pay the recipient 200 zuz. Only afterwards may he displace him. This applies even if the property was worth only a mana, 100. Why? Because in the document it says 200. So in the document is the proof. If the document didn't say how much, because the ruse, you don't want to say how much, right? Because then obviously it's more obvious, right?
Yeah.
So in this instance, since the document says, we go based on the document.
So you don't have to mention the price. You don't have to.
I mean, what do you mean in a document?
And
No.
You don't have
If-
to specify.
I mean, today the law is you do,
Yeah, but then,
but we're talking about Talmudic times, right?
yeah. That's it.
But yeah, today because today we have to go by dinim malchus dinim. The law of the land is law, and the law of the land is if you're making a transference of a property, even gifting it, you have to make a contract. You have to make a deed of sale, right?
Mhm.
Otherwise, there's no transference.
Receipt.
You get it. You need a deed of sale.
I know, but also you get a receipt when you buy something.
We're not talking about buying something. We're talking about land now, right? We're not talking about you bought
Sorry, I went away.
you bought some cookies, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Halacha number 4. When a person exchanges a courtyard for another courtyard, a neighbor is not given the right to displace one of the recipients. So they're exchanging. So now there's another nuance to the law, right? I'm not selling, I'm just exchanging. Then, no. When a person exchanges a courtyard for an animal or a movable property, we evaluate the worth of the animal or the movable property. The neighbor then gives this amount to the purchaser and displaces him. Purchaser cannot tell the neighbor, give me an article like the one I use for the purchase, for this is a ruse and it's not reckoned with at all. Right? So, what's the ruse? And others, I'm making an exchange. You're not making an exchange. You're selling your courtyard, but instead of saying the money, you're saying the animal. Well, the animal has worth, and that's what you're doing, and that's a ruse, and therefore, the neighbor can take the land and just pay what the value of the courtyard is. Okay. Following rules apply when a person sells a colleague a small portion of land in the midst of the field and then sells him a larger portion of land next to that field. We evaluate the property. The small portion that he sold him first is of greater or lesser value than the portion that he sold him afterwards. Purchaser acquires the desired land. The neighbor cannot displace him. For the purchaser himself is a neighbor by virtue of the small amount of land that he purchased in the center. If the small portion of land in the center is the same value as the portion on the side, this is an act of deception. The neighbor is entitled to displace the purchase from the second portion of a field that he bought. Why isn't they both deception? I'm not clear on that. Hold on. Did you get that? Anybody get that? Okay. Yeah, that's one version of that. So the way I understand it is as follows. Here's his whole land. He sold them a small portion inside over here. As a result, there's no neighbors, right?
Mhm.
And then he sold them this portion, and there's a neighbor here, right? That's the issue.
Next to small,
Next to the small one.
yeah, patch.
But he is a neighbor to the next one that he sold them. So then this neighbor over here doesn't have a claim because I'm also a neighbor. But then we want to see if it's a ruse or not. So how much did he sell the first property? If he sold the first property equal to the second property, even though this is a small piece, and we know that it's a ruse. If he sold it for the value what it is, this small one, right? And then he sold this for the value what it is, so then that's okay. That's what, okay? So in others, the court has to evaluate if this was a ruse or not. Obviously, it smells like one, but they have to know indeed if it is one. Got it?
Because the one that is in the midst of the land is of a smaller size.
Well, that's the whole point, right? The whole point is that if it was a large piece, so then it might touch one neighbor, and then that would become a problem, right? So he's doing that, he's doing this purposefully, so then there will be no other neighbor. There's no other neighbor, because if it's touching it, if the land was not sold in the middle like this, but was sold, let's say, a small piece like this, well, there's a neighbor here, so then he has a claim. So he's giving in the middle over here. But you have to see, how the contract is made to see if it's a ruse or not. I said earlier, "Dasisas atayve yashar." Do that which is good and is straight and appropriate. Because it is good and appropriate that if I'm selling I'm selling property for 100, what I want is that I get my 100. So why would I not give to my neighbor the first right? Because for him, it's better that he has two properties next to each other. He can till the soil, he can plow, It's much easier when you have two fields next to each other than you have one here and then you have one, several blocks away. So that's good and appropriate. That's the concept. Now, of course, the neighbor doesn't have to buy it. If he can't afford it or he doesn't want more, whatever, for whatever reason, he doesn't have to buy it, but he has the right of first refusal. That's the point. Okay. And now we're talking about the laws of where there might be some deception, right? To get around this law. Okay. Number 6. Yeah. We're all paying attention. I think what's necessary is you got to pay attention to the words that we're learning in the Rambam. By following it in the Rambam, what he is saying, I think we're going to get greater clarity. Okay. So when a person sells a property within the context of a conditional agreement, whether the condition was stipulated by the seller or by the purchaser, a neighbor cannot displace the purchaser until all conditions are met. This applies even if the neighbor agrees to fulfill the conditions stipulated by the seller, right?
He doesn't have to fulfill the conditions.
No, he does. If I'm selling to you
Yes.
and I'm making stipulations, conditions on the sale, right? So the neighbor can come and say, well, okay, I'll take those stipulations,
Oh,
right?
yes.
But I'm sorry, the neighbor cannot displace the purchaser until all the conditions are met. And the purchaser acquires the property entirely without the original owner retaining any connection to it.
That's why I said that.
Or the purchaser, a neighbor cannot displace the purchaser until all conditions are met, and the purchaser acquires property entirely without the original owner. Only then may the purchaser displace him, right? In other words, once the conditions have been met by the purchaser, then the neighbor can displace him. And because it's completely his then.
I was trying to say if he stalls on the conditions, he leaves a little bit out and it's like ambiguous. It's not really given to him yet.
Huh?
If he hasn't given the condition yet, and he holds on to that condition, he doesn't fulfill that condition,
So then it's not his.
so he has to.
So then it's not the purchaser. If he doesn't fill the condition, then it's not an acquisition. So then the whole issue is not an issue, right? Neighbor doesn't have any rights then. Halacha number 7. When the purchaser has built or improved the property he purchased or destroyed it or impaired it, if the neighbor displaces him, he must pay him for the money that is appropriate for him. In all of these deeds, he is considered the agent of the neighbor. Shh. You hear that? So, in other words, if you purchase the land of it from me, right, and you did benefits to the property, so of course you should get paid for that. You are considered like an agent to the neighbor. Similarly, the purchaser took a loan before the neighbor displaced him, and the neighbor displaced him afterwards. His creditor may not expropriate the property from the neighbor, because it really never truly belonged to the purchaser, right? So it's not like, oh, it was mine and now I gave it to the neighbor. No, it says like it was purchased from the original owner. The following principle governs all these laws. Whenever a person purchases a property bordering on a colleague's property line, he is considered the person's agent. And it is as if he were sent only to better the interests and not to impair them. So this guy who purchased it is not considered a purchaser. He's considered an agent of who? The neighbor. Of the neighbor. And therefore, whatever he did as an agent can only do something for the benefit of the principal who sent him, right? Thus, if he improves property, he receives only his expenses. If he impairs the value of the property by digging, destroying, or partaking of its produce, we reduce the money paid to him. Right? He gets less. When do we take into account the produce of which he partook? When he partook of the produce after the neighbor came and brought money to displace him. This does not apply with regard to the produce in which he partook before that time. The contrary, he is considered to have partaken of his own produce, and none of it is taken into account. Well, but we consider him an agent that time. So why you say it's his own? He's an agent for the land, but not for the produce. The produce he can benefit from, right? He's not an agent for the produce, but only for the land. That's the way we must say, the way I understand it.
Rabbi, could you scroll up, please?
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Thank you. Was that clear of that idea? Okay. Halacha number 8. When a person purchases a field from two owners, and the neighbor comes and desires to displace him only from the portion of the property that he purchased from one, he is not given the right. He must either displace him from the entire property or leave him with the entire property. Right?
Yeah.
When, by contrast, a person sells a property to two people, a neighbor has the right either to displace both of them or to displace one and leave the other. Because if two people, so then each one's independent. So what's the difference if I'm owning, if we both purchase from the seller, right? And the neighbor only wants my property. What's the difference to you? Doesn't make a difference, right? So it's good for everybody. It's not an issue over here. However, in the first instance, when the field from two owners, right? In other words, there's two owners selling at the same time, and he sold to one person, right? Let's say a field from two owners from the portion of the property. One second.
Purchase and sell.
Can't displace just one of them. Has to displace either take the entire property or leave the entire property. Okay. Halacha number 9. When a neighbor comes to displace the purchaser, but before the neighbor displaces him, the neighbor sells him the field he owns that borders on the property. He forfeits his right. I'm the neighbor, and I'm coming to take the land from the purchaser, but I then sell him my land, right? So I'm no longer the neighbor, so I can't do it anymore, right? Makes sense. Number 10, when the agent conducts a sale of a property and he himself is a neighbor, he does not have the right to displace the purchaser. Since he himself sold the property, there is no greater waiver possible.
Okay.
Right.
No longer-
When a creditor of the seller expropriates a field from the neighbor should collect the due from the purchaser whom he displaced. The purchaser in turn should collect the due from the seller. Well, you got that? Because remember, the purchaser is only an agent. So what happened over here? Let's play this up. I hope you're with me. Here's the seller. Here's the purchaser, right? And here's the neighbor. Correct, Demont? Got it?
Mhm.
Yeah? So what happened over here? This is the seller. Right now, the neighbor got it, right? But there was a creditor on the field. So he expropriated it from the neighbor. Got it? Make sense? So now what's the neighbor supposed to? Who's he got to go to? Who's going to get the money from? The land was taken from him. He paid for the land, right? Who's he going to go to?
First,
Hmm?
like for two people. Either the agent.
He has to go to the purchaser,
Okay.
who serves as an agent, right? He goes to the purchaser. He gets his money back from him. And the purchaser has to go to court and to get his money back from the original owner, right? Because he had a lien on the property. It was a lien on him, right? And that's why it was expropriated from the neighbor. Okay, Allah. Oops. Okay.
Finished?
Yeah. Halacha 12. Yeah. Three more halachas. Whenever a creditor expropriates property as a payment for an outstanding debt, a neighbor has the right to displace him. For the person expropriating property should not have a greater right than the one who purchases. So the creditor, look what the creditor is doing, right? The creditor is expropriating, right, the property. So what can the neighbor, from the neighbor? What can the neighbor do? Pay him, because it's his neighboring property. If he could pay for it from the original seller, for sure you could pay for it from the creditor. Shouldn't be less than to be able to buy it from him. They can do that, right? If at any later date the original owner desires to pay back the money that he owed, the ownership of the field will revert to him. He always has a right, as we explained in the appropriate place. Wow. So listen to this. This is really intriguing. So the neighbor now, right, paid for the field. So he paid twice now, right?
Yeah.
Paid twice. The original owner still has an attachment to the land. What's the proof? Because it was expropriated from him. So there's money now that's due. So he has an attachment to the land. If he wants to take back that property and to pay him, he can do so. Wow. Intriguing. Okay, two halachas left. Number 13, when a minor is a neighbor and the court sees that it is to his benefit, it displaces the purchaser on his behalf or enables him to share in the division of the property among the neighbors as it sees fit. Right, so a minor, right? A minor has property. Parents passed away. He has an inheritance of property. The court sees to it to his benefit, and if it's his benefit to displace the purchaser, right, then they'll do that. If it's not his benefit, then they won't. A man's wife owns property that borders on the property that is being sold. The husband has the right to displace the purchaser. For all of the wife's property is in his domain, and he has the right to exercise every privilege that would be hers. Right? So again, here's wife's property. Next to it is being sold. So the husband can expropriate it. Because all property that belongs to a wife in marriage, the husband has the right of usage. Even though he doesn't own it, because it's hers after, if there's a divorce or after he passes, right? It's hers, because it was hers to begin with, right? But he has the right of usage, right? The man is the one who has to it has to till the soil and bring the produce home, right?
Yeah.
So he can expropriate it. The neighbor who's selling over here that's next to his wife's land. Okay. Even if a woman performed the kinyan, affirming that she waives her right on behalf of the purchaser, her act is no consequence, and her husband may displace him. So she made an act of a kinyan. I'm waiving my right. She can't do that. Because she only has a right to the ownership of the property, but not the usage of the property. And what's the point of selling a property to the neighbor? Not that the neighbor has property, but he has now better functional property because he has two properties next to each other, so he can work the land better, right? It's easier to work the land when you have one next to the other than one, 2 blocks away from each other. Amazing. Following rules apply if the wife took the initiative and displaced the purchaser, or the servant who carried on the business affairs on behalf of the master displaced the purchaser. If the husband or the master acquiesces to the displacement, he confirms their deeds. If he desires, he may not confirm their deeds, and the wife or the servant must return the property. Because again, they don't have rights to functionality. They just have, she has the right for ownership, right?
Without usage.
But not usage. And the servant is only an agent, but not her agent, his agent, because for functionality. Because remember, the whole issue here is functionality. The issue is not having land, right? It's not essential, right? It's about, the functionality of having. Wow, amazing. I hope you got that, folks.
Thank you, Rabbi.